Welcome to the Darnell and Cody show, where we talk about social, political, and philosophical issues currently relevant to us as a society. Today we're going to be talking about lobbying. Lobbying that we're talking about specifically is the attempt to seek influence or policies or actions by monetarily injecting money into legislation or government officials by private sector or corporations. Many countries allow lobbying within their government, including the EU, the body of the European Union, and America has it. And there is over $2 billion of lobbying money that is spent each year, and that has been going on for at least the past 5 years. The number has continually increased each year. And this is a very troubling thing. It basically gives a monetary incentive to intentionally go against or allow policies that some politicians are voted in to support. It gives a monetary incentive not to serve public interests at the behest of special interests by people that have money and are willing to pay for it. Lobbying in America has proven to have a correlation with great financial return. A study in 2011 showed that the 50 firms that spent the most on lobbying yielded spectacular returns. And this is very troubling, as companies are basically swaying politicians completely against what they are literally put into office to do in some cases, and voting into action certain things, many times for the healthcare industry. We'll get into that in a little bit, with sometimes dangerous medicines that are approved by the FDA just because of lobbying, and other times there are foreign countries. We're also going to get into that. So I feel like, what is your opinion on this, Darnell, when you have corporations in other countries directly influencing policy by injecting money into the government, essentially, into the lobbying stream?
Well, I think lobbying at its core isn't bad in and of itself. Anybody can lobby for any purpose, and as a result, lobbying works for all sorts of conflicting interests. The problem is that while spending money as you wish is I suppose you can argue for a case that's part of the First Amendment and free speech, it leads to an unfair advantage when there are those with a lot more capital than the average person. So those with the most capital have the most influence. And that's the heart of the problem in regards to lobbying. But at the same time, it's a sort of incurable flaw that comes not from lobbying itself, but from greed and destructive self-interest. For example, there has been a lot of money in lobbying to promote corporations and laws that favor businesses, as you said, at the cost of public or global interest, be it economically or environmentally. But at the same time, there has also been money spent, a lot of money spent in lobbying for the interest of environmentalism and other nonprofit causes and activism. So lobbying can be used for good or bad. It's really a classic case of blaming the gun and not the gunner, right? The gun can be used and abused for, obviously, malevolence, but that doesn't mean the gun itself is evil necessarily. So, but it also doesn't mean that the gun is harmless and should be carelessly given out. So it's one of those situations where we have to look into the depth of the problem and seek a solution that isn't just restrictive but reformative. And that starts with not criticizing lobbyists or lobbying itself, but really looking at the individuals and special interests that are abusing the system.
Right, that's a big problem that we have with basically overspending by lobbyists. A good example of that is the NRA spends $5 million per year just on guns rights. I feel like there should be a cap of some kind on the amount that a company or an organization can lobby individually, at least. You have over $250 million of lobbying done by pharmaceuticals and healthcare products But this isn't all coming from the same place, at least. There's a great divide, and I'm sure some companies are spending well over $5 million more than the NRA are for certain products within the pharmaceutical and health products. However, I think that it's kind of, the gun is still dangerous. Even the gun would have better not been invented, in my opinion. It has done good, but it's done mostly evil. And I feel as if we got rid of lobbyism entirely, then we would have a more perhaps balanced system where people would or politicians would listen to the public opinion more. Um, Obviously, I don't think that we should, just go from what we have now immediately to no lobbying. We're going to need to start with the stepping stones and see where it goes with that. We might reach the point where we don't need to change anymore if we have the regulations where there's a cap of some kind. But I really do feel as though a system without lobbying, such as some countries that do exist now, many in Europe, don't have lobbying, such as Sweden and France. Their governments are potentially better off by not being swayed by basically a monetary incentive. It's troubling to me that you have companies greatly benefiting from the lobbying, where another study done in 2009 found that lobbying brought substantial returns, as I had said earlier, and sometimes as high as 22,000% in returns. So it becomes a point where it's literally just like corruption at its highest order in certain circumstances. So how do you feel about businesses gaining these kinds of great returns from lobbying on their behalf?
Well, I think you have to look at in a case by case basis. Perhaps these lobbying efforts aren't necessarily were a bad intended or unfairly intended lobbying, right? So you have to look at what was the company asking for, what law was the company lobbying for, and maybe it was something like that was terrible. Like maybe a company wanted to get rid of all regulation regarding environmental regulation, so the company can pollute haphazardly and just in the pursuit of a profit. But it could also have been something that's more benign and harmless, where no one was really affected. They were just pursuing a simple law that would allow them to do business in another country or another district or something like that. So we really have to look at it as a case by case basis. I think it's something to be said though that yes, it's not really ideal that lobbying should be used as a sort of platform to sway individual politicians, and basically it's legalized bribery, right? And that's something that has to be addressed and fixed. But I think that's where I kind of disagree with you on, is that we can't blame lobbying for what people abuse the system for. And lobbying, really at the core, it can be used for good and bad. So let's say there's a group of people that really want to fix something about, so let's say there's like an environmental concern. So there's a law right now that allows companies to, let's say, pollute without really having any repercussions. A group of people can gather together and say, hey, we're going to lobby the government so that these corporations can't do this. We're going to lobby for this law to put in regulation to be put in effect. This is one of the examples that lobbying can be pursued. So it's not that the lobbying itself is bad, the system itself is bad. It's more like that we really have a problem with this individuals really looking out for their personalized, self-interest at the cost of literally everything else, right? Everything else can be neglected so as long as their needs are met. And that's the dangerous aspect of human nature that we have to confront, I feel. And rather than just address because in that situation we can't really have any system in place because we can all just say, well, what's next? Let's get rid of lobbying because people are bad. Let's get rid of guns because people are dangerous and bad. Let's get rid of knives because people can be trusted. Let's just have the bare minimum for everything because people can't be trusted with anything that has even remotely any potential to do harm, right? So it's just a bad idea, I feel like, or a bad logical process because it can spiral out of control for so many things. And I feel like we have to really
Right.
look at what we can do to fix the system, but not go so far as to get rid of the system in its entirety.
I see what you're saying. However, obviously, lobbying, it's a broader definition than I had originally said, and lobbying includes persuasion. So I'm perfectly fine with people writing letters to their congressmen, which you can still do right now, and it's free, which is another great thing. And you can go on to Capitol Hill and protest. That's all free. Anything that you can do that's free, I'm okay with to persuade or sway a politician. Voice your opinion really is what you're getting down to. That's an important process. And you need to be able to voice your opinion. You can go to council meetings and other things to also voice your opinion. Sometimes you're unfortunately not going to be able to be heard there because there's the lines of people. But again, there's the emails and all these things now that we have great technology. And my problem that I see specifically with the lobbying that we have in our country isn't lobbying through email or lobbying through protests, voicing your opinion on a bill or what have you. Lobbying through any other means that's free, like I said. The problem I see is when companies or individuals that are wealthy are getting people that they hire to sway politicians and that they basically, as you said, bribe them. It's blatant corruption at that point. It's no longer a process of voicing your opinion in a justice or a justifiable, meaningful way that's gonna benefit society and it's gonna keep democracy flowing. Now you're bribing people, and this is the problem I see. I don't feel that we need to have the process of lobbying in place now to be able to get what we need in society. There's other routes that people can take, and they're already available.
Right, and I agree with all this. We have to really just fix the problem that comes with when money is involved, obviously, and bribery. It's basically we're allowing bribery to take place with the current situation. But again, I'm just adding that caveat that we have to be careful when we say that all lobbying is bad, or try to get rid of lobbying itself. We have to be careful with that because lobbying really at the core is really just the power of the people to petition the government and speak against the government or seek change or persuasion. And unfortunately, a part of that has to come from, not has to necessarily, but part of that does come from the capital, right? How you spend your money and how you get attention is, unfortunately, sometimes you have to spend the money to get even into the forefront of making the issue relevant. And in regards to that, we have to really fix those kind of problems where people, congressmen and senators are really just waiting for lobbyists to approach them, and they're willing to just be bought as long as they can buy the boats back, right? So that's what it really comes down to. You buy my boat, you give me these donations for my campaign, then I'll give you this law, right? And that's just politics 101, what goes down. And it's unfortunate, but I feel like that's not the representation of what lobbying should be. So we can't really just get rid of ban lobbying itself as an answer or as a remedy, because I don't think that's really the answer to our problems.
I agree. We shouldn't get rid of all forms of lobbying. That's why I feel you need to have regulations in place. Whether it's a cap, I'm not an expert on these matters. Again, we're not professionals. We don't get paid to research all this stuff and give an answer to the president at the end of the day. We are speculating and voicing our opinions. So I feel that if there's a cap or they just totally regulate so that there can be no monetary benefit to politicians, sometimes you are going to have to spend money for lobbying. Maybe it's through ads or what have you to get people aware of it. I'm fine with that. But I don't feel as though there should be genuine bribes, basically, that are happening under the table. And this brings us to our next thing, where our next bit of the conversation. You have foreign countries now that sway policy making. They donate over $500 million each year to lobbying. This is coming from India, Israel, China, various places. And when you have this much money coming in each year from another country to influence policy that's happening in our own country, and then some of these countries themselves don't allow lobbying. China, Israel has very strict laws on lobbying. They do allow it to some extent, but China doesn't allow it at all. Many of the countries that do lobby in our own country don't allow it. So what is your opinion on this matter, Darnell, when you have countries that are outside of the United States influencing policy inside the United States?
Right, and that's a complicated issue. I feel like other countries really shouldn't have a direct say, or even really that much of an indirect say in how we as a nation operate. And it should be up to our citizens to decide that. But at the same time, given our global economy and global situation, it's unreasonable to expect that other countries don't have influence on our nation and on our decision-making policies. I mean, that's the whole point of foreign policy, right? So when we have these foreign lobbyists, the question we have to really ask ourselves is, to what extent can they lobby, and what are they really lobbying for? And these two things are things that we should really know before we criticize the system. And to what extent they have the power to lobby for, right? What can they lobby for? Can they lobby for, let's say, we want to sell beef, like Chinese beef in the States, and they're lobbying for that law to be put in place. I don't think that's really problematic. If that's what Chinese people want to do, then by all means they should have the right to ask, right, for that to happen. But if they're asking for, real laws and things that are at the heart of policies that matter to us, that directly affects our citizens, then it should be restrictive, is what I'm saying. It should be we should look at how much power and how much capacity and capability these foreign lobbyists have. And the whole process, of course, should be transparent. So everything that these foreign lobbyists are lobbying for should be in the eyes of the public, and everyone should be able to look at it and have their own voices heard. So there should be able to be counter lobby whatever they're lobbying if we don't agree with it. So as long as those things are in place, I don't think there's really that big of a problem, unless, like I said, they have no restrictions on what they can lobby for and how much they can spend to lobby for something.
Right. I think I would agree with you there. I mean, if China is going to try and sell some beef, again, they can probably do that through another American corporation that they make the deal with to provide this beef to basically distribute across America. They're going to have some American corporation helping them along the way. And if that's the case, I feel as though China shouldn't be lobbying themselves. They should be trying to broker a deal with the American company, who then, if they need to, they can at best lobby to the American government on behalf of their own interests as a American company. It's very troubling to me that we have these countries investing money in our policies, period. And when you have nefarious countries such as Saudi Arabia and Pakistan investing money in our countries, we all know at the end of the day that these people are, I mean, Saudi Arabia is lobbying for oil money. They're lobbying to allow us to keep on drilling while they commit humanitarian crimes. And they basically abuse their women in their country. Pakistan has similar issues in many places in the country. So, I mean, these are just some of the countries that are lobbying here. China, we made a podcast about just recently, and they're doing all kinds of nefarious things over there. And they're not playing fair in the economy itself, but then they're also allowed to spend money here in our own government to influence our policies. So it just seems like it needs to be highly regulated at best. And at worst, for certain people, for me, it's not at worst, that foreign governments should just not be allowed to do this. I mean, we can all agree that, there's certain things that they might be able to lobby to for free. Again, you're allowed to write to people, you're allowed to make deals, you're allowed to speak to people, you're allowed to make phone calls. If you're a really rich Chinese business owner, you can probably get a hold of a senator somehow and let him know of what you're trying to do. And you don't need to pay money to do that. And if some business owner in America is going to profit from some Chinese business, they can also go through the process of doing that through free means. They don't need to bribe these people to get financial gain. It just doesn't seem right to me. So, how do you feel about this, Darnell?
Well, yes, I think there is a fine line between diplomacy and bribery and dark dealings. But I think right now, as we are looking at the situation, at least as we are currently framing what foreign lobbying is, if it's just certain individuals looking for certain policies to be made in regards to the United States, and they're directly spending money to get the attention of senators or congressmen, right? So because let's be honest, if China wanted to, let's go back to the beef example. Let's say China wanted to start selling beef in the United States. Which senator is going to really care? Which congressman is really going to care to look at the problem? I mean, they get thousands of letters, thousands of meetings. So I'm assuming that the real motivation, or at least kind of get your foot in the door, that's where the lobbying comes in. Like, we're hiring these people to go and present our case, and that's what lobbyists are. So that's where, and you need that kind of a buffer. You can't just, the Chinese corporation business owner is not going to go to Washington himself and start, giving a presentation, right? So that's why the whole point of lobbyists exists. I guess I'm more focused on to what extent do these lobbyists, what kind of power do they have? To what extent can they ask for certain things? If it's just relating to purely business, economical benefits or something along those lines, then I really don't have a problem with it. If it's, as long as it's not, like I said, nefarious. But if it's more so something that's diplomatically sensitive or something along those lines, that's when we have to look at it and say, well, how much should these people really have a say in our domestic policies, for example, and stuff like that? I think that's I agree with you on there. It's not acceptable. They shouldn't have a say in our domestic policies, for example. But so far as it relates to just purely diplomatic, two nations trying to work out a deal, as long as it's transparent, as long as those dealings themselves are honest and not nefarious, then I feel like there's no real problem there that's taking place.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, obviously, I feel as though there should be some kind of reach from business owner to government official. And it's unfortunate right now that it kind of seems like what's required is money, really. At the end of the day, it's I want to be able to get noticed, essentially. Um, and in a perfect world, this wouldn't exist, but realistically, you're probably right, that this is going to have to take place at some scale, which again brings us back to just regulation. Perhaps I would say maybe the best route would be a cap, as I said earlier, of how much money they can actually lobby per company or per uh, individual, what have you. It still is troubling to me, especially with these outside foreign countries, especially the ones that don't even essentially want to play fair. They don't have lobbying in their own countries. We're not allowed to have our corporations lobby to them. For instance, in China, they require many of their health beauty products to be tested on humans first. And here in America, we have the problem where we test things on animals. But then after we test them on animals, they go into consumer sales essentially immediately. And so they don't get the quote unquote tested on humans stamp that China requires. So then the Chinese kind of like demand this of us. Um, it's very bizarre that it's a double standard to me, really, especially from these countries that don't allow lobbyism in their own country. I don't think that we should have to put up with these companies or countries that are from these places. I understand where we have our own businesses, and if they have their own foreign interests, they can lobby on behalf of these foreign interests. But it just doesn't seem right to me that we have actual countries lobbying in our own country. Um, I don't know if you have anything else to add, Darnell.
Yeah, I would say I agree with you there. Probably we could maybe put in place a law that says lobbying can only happen in a reciprocal fashion. And yeah, I think that would kind of address the situation you're talking about. But other than that, yeah, I don't have nothing more to add.
All right, well, I think we've covered this issue sufficiently. Basically, we kind of agree lobbying should be at least regulated to a certain extent, especially on the foreign aspect of lobbying. Perhaps there should be a cap on the amount of money that lobbying can come from each company. But at the end of the day, it does allow people to voice their opinion in a proper manner. So we thank you all for watching, and we hope to catch you next time.
See you all.